Good morning. This is Father Stephen Kelly from St. John's Church in Detroit. We're continuing our series of daily morning meditations, where we generally look at one or another lessons that are assigned for morning or evening prayer, what is known as the Daily Office Lectionary. And I thought today we'd take a look at the lesson that's assigned for morning prayer from the second book of Samuel. Well, we haven't really looked at Samuel for a couple of weeks. We have just finished the first book of Samuel, where we began with the birth of Samuel the prophet, the pregnancy of his mother, and then his birth, and how he became this great prophet, and then, of course, ultimately the crowning of King Saul, and Saul's failure to serve the living God. Even though God had told the people of Israel, you really don't want a king, I promise you that, they said, no, we want a king, and so Samuel, of course, allowed it to happen. Now we're getting into the second book of Samuel, and what has happened at the end of the first book is that Saul is dead, and his son Jonathan is dead too, who would be the heir apparent. And so it is that God has already had Samuel, before Samuel died, anoint David as king. But it's going to be a bit of a mop-up operation as he begins to take his position and his reign as the king of Israel. So we're at the very beginning of the second book of Samuel. Now it came to pass, after David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, that David had abode 2 days at Ziklag. And it came to pass on the third day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent and earth upon his head. So it was, when he came to David, he fell to the earth and did obeisance. And David said unto him, From whence comest thou? And he said unto him, Out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said unto him, How went the matter? I pray thee, tell me. And he answered, And the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. And David said unto the young man that told him, How knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son are dead? And the young man that told him said, As I happened by chance upon the Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and the horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and called unto me, and I answered and said, Here am I. And he said unto me, Who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said unto me again, Stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me, for anguish is come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. So I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after that he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head, and the bracelet that was on his arm, and it brought them hither unto my Lord. Then David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and likewise all the men that were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until even, for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. And David said unto the young man that was told him, Whence art thou? And he answered, I am the son of a stranger, an Amalekite. And David said unto him, How wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called out one of the young men and said, Go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, Thy blood be upon thy head, and for thy mouth hath testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. And David lamented with his lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. Okay, so we have kind of interesting stuff here. First of all, Saul basically had been mortally wounded and asked this Amalekite to go ahead and finish him off, to do him in. And of course, David took out his grief on the Amalekite, who actually did the final thing. Who knows if Saul could have been saved by the doctors and the surgeons. But ultimately, even though David knew that it was going to be him that would be king, he still mourns for the people of Israel. He mourns for Saul, and he mourns for his dear friend Jonathan, who would have been the heir apparent. But even Jonathan knew that David was the one whom God had chosen to be the next king, and Jonathan was willing to do obeisance and to serve David as well. So this sets up the beginning of the story of David as the king of Israel. And as we will see in the coming weeks as we go through the books of Samuel, that David will have moments of brilliance and joy and great expectation as king, as well as great failures and sinfulness. But he is human after all. And of course we know that ultimately God is setting up what will be the heir of David, the ultimate authority of all, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who will be from David's seed, Jesus Christ. So today's Thursday, 9 o'clock, Holy Communion, and I do hope you can join us. You can worship with us, and if you're present, to receive the Blessed Sacrament. And I hope you have a Thursday that's full of blessings.